Okay, cool. All right, guys, so we'll talk about the eye model right now. Basically just the gross anatomy of the eye. It's really not too bad. So with this model, what it's showing is the eyeball in situ, or in place, and it's surrounded kind of by its bony casing here, okay? Now, we can determine directionality by a couple different ways. First thing you can look for here is the lacrimal gland. It's this large gland here on the lateral part of the eyeball. And so knowing that this is the lacrimal gland here, that can tell you that this is lateral, okay? And that therefore this must be medial. So one of the first things you want to look for if you want to determine like lateral, medial, look for that lacrimal gland, because lacrimal gland is lateral. And I should probably tell you what the lacrimal gland does. It makes tears. So the lacrimal gland is this gland that sits on the lateral part of your eyeball, all the way over here, and it's what's actually secreting tears. And it secretes those tears on the surface of your eye. Those tears will wash over the surface of your eye and then drain into a duct, kind of on the medial part of your eye there, called the nasolacrimal duct. So then your tears actually drain into your nasal cavity. Now, we're always making tears to some extent, even if you're not actually crying. Just crying would be like a production of tears a lot, right? But our eyes are always sort of moistened by those tears that are made by the lacrimal gland. Okay, now, tears also contain enzymes called lysozymes, which actually break down bacterial cell walls. So it also functions as an antibiotic. It's kind of cool. There's also pheromones in tears. So we'll talk about pheromones next week. But basically they're like chemical messengers that are like scents. We're unconscious of them, but they provide information about like another person's physiology. We'll talk about that on Monday. That's kind of cool. So what we'll do then is move on to the rest of the structures of the eye itself. Now I'll probably need to remove this from the model if I can. I'm not sure if this one comes off. That's all right, it doesn't. That's all right. So what we see here, this is the white of the eye, or it's also called sclera. So anatomically it's called sclera, which is the white part of your eyeball. Okay, now sclera means scar. And so apparently it looks like scar tissue, or like a scar. So the white of your eye is the sclera here. Okay, that forms part of the fibrous layer of your eye. Now, the anterior-most part of your eyeball, it's this clear layer. Now, it's still part of the fibrous part of your eye. It's still like a fibrous tissue. But this tissue happens to be clear, and this clear layer is called the cornea. So the very anterior-most part of your eye that's clear is called the cornea. Okay? Now, what's interesting about the cornea, it's actually lined with the simple squamous epithelium. So when you look at something, you actually have to look through cells to see it. Because the light has to pass through that epithelial tissue to even get into your eye. Because there's actually epithelial tissue that's on the outside of the cornea here. So it's kind of weird that we're all looking through like epithelium right now. We just can't see the cells. I know. Whoa. So we got sclera, which is the white of the eye, and then cornea, which is the clear part here. Okay. Now those can both be regenerated. Like if you damage the sclera or cornea, it can grow back. Now, we'll have some vascular layers to the eye, which I'll get to later, and those are going to be deeper layers within the eyeball that have a lot of blood vessels and can help nourish the deeper structures of the eye. Before I actually get into the eye model, I wanted to show you guys some of the what are called extrinsic eye muscles or extraocular muscles. These are muscles that help move your eyeball around. So you guys remember from our discussion of the peripheral nervous system, we talked about how there's specific cranial nerves that can move your eyeball around, like oculomotor, trochlear, and abducens. Those all control extraocular muscles. Okay, they're also called extrinsic eye muscles, and that's what these are here. So these big red projections here on the eyeball, these are all extrinsic eye muscles. Okay, and each of these extrinsic eye muscles functions to move the eyeball around in a specific manner. Okay. So this one up here, up top, it's more superior. So this one's called superior rectus. Superior rectus. And so superior rectus, when this muscle contracts, it's going to cause your eye to rotate upward or superiorly. So if you look up, you're using superior rectus. In fact, if you look up and try to look up really hard, you can feel the muscle. Like it kind of hurts a little bit. So that's superior rectus. Now, over here in the lateral part of your eyeball, we know this is lateral because, by the way, it's next to lacrimal gland, which is lateral. So this muscle over here that's on the lateral part of your eyeball, that's called lateral rectus. Lateral rectus is involved in abduction of the eyeball, or basically veering your eyeball laterally. Okay, so if you look to the side and your eye actually kind of moves laterally, then you're going to be using your lateral rectus. It's also called abduction. And the specific nerve that innervates that specific muscle is called abducens, which is cranial nerve number 6. So if you get abducens nerve damage, you can't abduct your eyes. In fact, your eyes would stay crossed, like cross-eyed. They'd be stuck medially. Now, we can also see medial rectus here in the medial part. I'll kind of have to get close to show you there. That's medial rectus. Okay, it's on the medial part of your eyeball. And so medial rectus is going to be involved in adduction of the eye, or basically drawing your eye inward towards your nose, so looking at something sort of medially. That's going to be involved with medial rectus. So when medial rectus contracts, it'll help you look medially. So if you cross your eyes, then you're using your medial rectus, right? If you can cross your eyes, then then you're using both medial rectuses and both eyeballs simultaneously. Okay. Now we will also have another muscle called inferior rectus. It's kind of difficult to see on this particular model, but it would be the muscle that's on the inferior side of the eyeball, right there. And inferior rectus would help you look downward, so it would depress the eye. Okay, so if you look down, you're using inferior rectus. This is on the inferior part of the eyeball. Now, we also have what are called the obliques. So we'll have a superior oblique and an inferior oblique. The superior oblique is a muscle that goes sideways here, just over by superior rectus. And superior oblique is involved in torsional movement of the eye. So having your eye move side to side like this, that's superior oblique. So I was talking about this earlier in lecture, how like if you kind of tilt your head side to side and you're looking at something and that object stays level in your visual field, you know, if you're wondering like if you tilt your head, but it's not as though like the whole room tilts with you, right? The room still looks upright. That's because your eyes actually tilt in the opposite direction to accommodate for your head tilt. That's called torsional movement. And the way that works is through these oblique muscles. So they can move side to side. It's kind of cool. That one's superior oblique over by superior rectus. We're also going to have inferior oblique right there by inferior rectus. Now basically these oblique muscles are easy to identify because the muscle fibers go obliquely, or basically sideways, whereas all the rectus kind of just go front to back, right, anterior to posterior, whereas the obliques go oblique, or sideways. So this one's an oblique muscle there. In fact, this one's inferior oblique, okay? Inferior oblique. Now the specific cranial nerve that innervates superior oblique is called the trochlear nerve. That's cranial nerve number 4. It's just that one cranial nerve to control that one muscle, trochlear nerve. Okay, and then the rest, if it's not lateral rectus or superior oblique, all the rest of those muscles are all controlled by oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve number 3, which controls most of those extrinsic eye muscles. Okay. Now, that's pretty much what we can see superficially on the eye. Basically, what we can see kind of just from the outside. Now, what we need to do is get deeper into the eyeball and show you some different layers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take off this top part of the model. Okay, this top part comes off. Now what that does is it exposes some space in the eyeball. So your eyeball is not just a solid mass of tissue. It's actually filled with a lot of fluid. See these large fluid-filled spaces. Okay. Let's see if you guys need to know this. I don't want to overteach you. Do you guys see anterior segment, posterior segment on there? I don't see it.
No.
All right, cool. Well, I don't even know that. So, now one thing I could do is I can take this piece out. Do you guys see that? Now it's not as though that in your eye this would all come out in one piece. It's just that that's how this works for this model. Now with this piece here, we have this clear part is the cornea, which we already talked about. That's the clear anterior-most part of your eye. If you look deep to the cornea, do you guys see there's that pigmented part on here? It's brown. That kind of gives you your eye color. That's called the iris. And so the iris is actually, it's a smooth muscle that's surrounded by a pigmented epithelium. And your iris here, that's the part of your eye that has a color, that controls the size of your pupil. And your pupil is the hole in the center of that iris. And so, you know, on our eyes, it looks like that dark dot right in the center of your eye. That's your pupil. And that basically, the pupil is a name for a space in the iris. It's not like an actual structure. There's no tissue there in the pupil. It's just this hole in the iris. But we give that hole a name. That's called a pupil. Okay? But the iris, as a smooth muscle, controls the size of that pupil. Right? So sometimes your pupils can be dilated or really big, or constricted and very small. And so we talked about that in lecture earlier, how like your sympathetic nervous system can dilate your pupils, and your parasympathetic nervous system can constrict them. So that will have an effect on the muscle of the iris, and therefore have an effect on the size of your pupil. That's what we can see here. Okay. Now, just posterior to the iris and the pupil, we'll have a structure called the lens. Now I'm going to take this out so you guys can see it. Here's the lens. Okay, now this would be similar to what it looks like in your own eye, but obviously not to scale, you know, because it's like bigger, about as big as my eye. And now the function of a lens, it does exactly what it sounds like. It acts like a lens. And so in that sense, it helps to focus light onto your retina. Now we'll talk about the retina here in a little bit, but the lens here, the lens of your eye, it's a lens that can change shape. Okay? And it changes shape by different muscles that are nearby that can pull on the lens or help relax the lens. It changes the shape of the lens and therefore changes how light is bent as it passes through the lens. And if you change that, you can change the focus of that light. Okay? So if you're looking at objects up close, your lens will be bent a certain way. If you're looking at objects far away, your lens will be bent another way to appropriately bend that light onto your retina, which allows you to see that light in focus. So you need this lens to focus that light. Otherwise, if you didn't have a lens, what you'd be looking at would just be out of focus. Okay? Now, just posterior to the lens, we'll have another structure called vitreous humor, which I don't see on your list. But on this model, what's represented as this big, clear mass is called vitreous humor. Vitreous humor is like this gelatinous substance that fills your eye. Now, if we had a cow eye to dissect, I can show you guys vitreous humor. It's pretty awesome. Let's look at it. It looks like Jell-O. If you guys remember, Jell-O is just like a lot of water and protein. That's essentially what your vitreous is. So your vitreous humor is just a lot of water and protein that fills in this large chamber on the inside of your eye. Okay? But that's on your list. Vitreous humor is not, which is interesting. Okay? Now, earlier I talked about how the lens needs to be able to change shape. And the way that the lens changes shape is that it doesn't change shape itself. It actually has muscles that pull on it that allow it to change shape. Okay? And the muscles that pull on it are called wait a second. Sorry, guys. Yeah, ciliary muscles. So the ciliary muscles here are this little red muscle here, just deep to the sclera over by your lens. And it's the ciliary muscle here that'll help control the shape of your lens. Okay? And the way they do this is they actually have ciliary ligaments that attach to the lens. So if you guys remember, a ligament attaches bone to bone. In the eye, we have something called the ciliary ligament, which attaches muscle to the lens. And these ciliary ligaments are represented on this eye model as all these white lines here. So all those white lines there on the inside of your eye model, those are ciliary ligaments. Okay? Now some of the models might not have them. This one does. So if you look up here, ciliary ligaments are all those white lines. Essentially they're ligaments that help attach the ciliary muscle to the lens so that when the muscle contracts, it'll pull on those ligaments and therefore pull on the lens and change the shape of the lens in a specific way. Those are the ciliary ligaments. Okay? Now, oh yeah, I'm sorry. On your list, they're calling those the ciliary zonules, but it's the same thing as a ciliary ligament. Okay? Ciliary zonule on your list is the same thing as a ciliary ligament. Now we're also going to have the ciliary process, which is nearby, and the processes are basically going to be these little indentations here. Okay, they almost look like sulci in the eye. Now these ciliary processes, they secrete something called vitreous humor. Vitreous humor is like a modified blood plasma that helps nourish the lens. So your lens sits in a fluid-filled cavity, and it's surrounded by a type of fluid called vitreous humor. And that vitreous humor is made by those ciliary processes. Okay. Now we'll go into more detail on those specific things in lecture on Monday, but those are things you can see on the model there. Now, on this model, we'll have 3 layers from superficial to deep. Okay, so the most superficial layer on the eye we talked about was the sclera. Okay, just deep to the sclera, we'll have another layer called choroid, C-H-O-R-O-I-D, choroid. Choroid on this model is represented as being kind of red here. That's the choroid layer. Now it's a vascular layer of the eye, and what the choroid does is it helps nourish the retina because it brings in the blood vessels of the retina, for the retina, and it also helps dissipate heat away from the eye. So it turns out that heat can actually build up inside your eyeball, because if you think about it, you got a lens, and that lens is focusing light. You guys ever play with magnifying glasses when you're a kid or whatever? You like burn things? Well, you're using a lens to focus light at a point, and that can get really hot at that point. Now, the inside of your eye can also get really hot because you have a lens in your eye, just like a magnifying glass kind of thing. Okay? So what happens is that the choroid of your eye helps pick up some of that excess heat that it can accumulate inside your eyeball and bring that away. So it's going to be absorbed by your bloodstream, and it's going to carry that heat away, which is kind of opposite of what we've learned, right? Because usually we think about blood flow as bringing heat to a tissue. In the eye, it's actually the blood flow that's actually helping to carry excess heat away from the eye, because that heat can build up on the inside of your eye. So that red layer here, that's choroid. Okay. Now the next layer deep to choroid on your model, it's kind of represented as yellow or orange here. That's all retina. Okay, so on the very innermost layer of the eyeball there, that's all the retina. Okay. Now the retina is nervous tissue, meaning that it has lots of neurons there. In fact, the neurons of the retina, there's specialized neurons that have photoreceptors. You guys remember from lecture, photoreceptors were receptors that can be sensitive to light or photons. So the retina actually has neurons that have photoreceptors so that you can actually sense light using your eyeball. Okay? So all that orange or yellow layer on the very innermost surface of your eye, that's going to be the retina. Okay? Now there's some specific parts of the retina that are interesting. We'll have something called macula lutea. So if you look on here, there's a little yellow spot on the very posterior part of the eyeball. On my model, it's shown as being number 32. But you should see a little yellow circle on the very posterior part of the eye. That's called the macula lutea, which literally means yellow spot. Macula lutea, yellow spot. And it's a yellow spot in the back of your retina. Now, the significance of the macula lutea, it's a very high concentration of photoreceptors, which means that that's the center of your visual field, or what you're looking at. And that's also your highest, that's the center of your highest visual acuity. That's basically where you have the sharpest vision, because you have the highest density of photoreceptors, like the most pixels, so you have the sharpest image at that point. So if you want to see something really well, you'd see it right in the center of your vision. You'd focus that light right on your macula lutea, because that has the highest density of photoreceptors and therefore the highest visual acuity or sharpness of image. Now the very center of macula lutea, it's not really denoted on your model, but we'll have a little spot called fovea centralis. Okay? Fovea centralis is a little spot right in the center of macula lutea. It's not in the model, so I can't show you. But that's going to be made up of only one type of photoreceptor called a cone, and your cone cells only sense color vision. So like red, green, blue, RGB, that kind of stuff. And so that's going to be your that's going to be your fovea centralis, only for color vision. Okay, now in lecture we'll talk more about this, some more specific details. But I believe that's on your list. It's just you can't see it on the model, so it's just more conceptual. the very centermost point of macula lutea is fovea centralis, and it's only cone cells. Okay? So, we'll have another structure right next to macula lutea, and it's the exact opposite of macula lutea. It's not a part of your retina that has the highest visual acuity. It's actually a part of your retina that's essentially blind. It's your blind spot. Okay? Now, the reason why you have a blind spot on your retina is that the neurons of the retina have to send their action potentials out of the eyeball. When I say action potentials, that's kind of true. I meant axons too. So neurons of the retina need to send their axons out through one point called the optic nerve. And we'll see the optic nerve here on the model. It's this large nerve protruding out of the back of the eye. Okay? And that's the optic nerve. It's going to basically be a big bundle of axons from your retina. And the part where all those axons converge into one big bundle, you get a blind spot there. Okay? You guys need to know that as the optic disc. And the optic disc is a part of your retina where you have so many axons converging at a point that you cannot fit any photoreceptor cells there. That's a blind spot on your retina. And that's exactly where the optic nerve meets the retina. So your blind spot is where the optic nerve meets the retina. Now, what's cool is that your brain actually fills that in. You know, it's not as though you actually see a blind spot normally. You know, when you look out at something, it's not as though you see a little circle that's blind, right? So your brain actually fills in that missing information. And there's ways you can trick your brain into sort of being able to see your blind spot, and we can do that later, you guys. We can do a blind spot test on the board. It's pretty cool. You find your blind spot, and the thing you're looking at will just disappear. But the way you have to do that is cover up one eye. Because also, the other way that you don't see your blind spot is the other eye will accommodate for what one eye can't see. It's like if your right eye can't see something, your left eye will actually see it, and your brain will fill in the corresponding gap. It's pretty cool. But that blind spot or optic disc is where the optic nerve meets the retina. Okay? And I believe that's it for the eye. Did I miss anything? I don't think so. All right, cool.